Character creation in Baldur's Gate 3 can be quite the daunting endeavor given how many options you have to choose from. Thankfully, there's a magic mirror in your camp that allows you to change cosmetic details about your character, such as your hair or skin color, or even what's between your legs. The fact you'll have more options for your genitals than you will for your face presets is kind of concerning to me, but that's a conversation for another day. And if you don't like any of the non-cosmetic features of your character, you can respec them at Withers for a mere pittance of coin. But there's one thing that Withers can't let you change: your race. This means whatever race you picked once you leave character select is the one you're going to be stuck with for the rest of the game. How Yin's doing? I'm an Ian, and this is my attempt to cure your choice paralysis by making a top 10 Baldur's Gate 3 race list. So let's get into it. Coming in at the bottom of the list, we have High Elves, both the purebred and half-breeds respectively. I'm doing this for two reasons. Firstly, the only major difference between the two races is the fact that half-elves get light armor and shield proficiencies, while the purebreds get a +3 to perception, which in my opinion is too small of a difference to warrant entirely separate slots on this list. But in truth, the main reason is I don't want to talk about the knife-eared bastards for more than half the video, so yeah. As for the High Elves themselves, you get a cantrip of your choosing from the wizard's spell list. This means the damage you do with this cantrip scales directly in proportion to your intelligence stat. So if you intend to be playing a character with a low intelligence score, don't pick a damage-dealing cantrip here. And keep in mind that whatever cantrip you picked here is tied directly to your race, not your character class, meaning you won't be able to respec it at Withers. Something you probably already figured out when you inevitably respec Shadowheart at Withers, because she is actually a half-elf high elf. This is why she knows the Firebolt cantrip at the start of the game, despite that spell not being on the cleric's spell list. And for those of yins who are paying attention, yes, this does mean that Astarion is a high elf in addition to being a vampire. But the real selling point of picking an elf, in my opinion, is the Fey Ancestry ability. This makes you immune to being put to sleep through magical means, as well as giving you advantage against charm spells. This is extremely powerful since while sleep and charm spells won't be coming up every fight, when they do come up, they can completely change the tide of a battle, since you'll go from having a fully primed and ready party ready for a tough fight ahead, to having two party members fighting your opponents, which now consist of one of your former party members. All the while Will is taking a nap in the middle of the floor. Due to this extreme power from the universal bonuses of just picking an elf in general, as well as the customization the High Elves provide with their choose your own cantrip, and you can see why they were able to beat so many other races onto this list. Surprisingly, at number 9, we have the Shield Dwarf. Starting with the universal traits to all dwarves, you get proficiency in hammer and axe weapons, which is a fun little bit of flavor, but to be perfectly honest, I find this to be mostly useless, since the majority of the time, if you had any intention of using an axe or a hammer weapon whatsoever, you probably picked a class that's already proficient in it. You also have a slight movement penalty when you're playing any of the shorty races, including dwarves. Personally, I find this shorty movement penalty to only really be a problem if you're trying to play a melee-oriented character, but that's just me. The last universal feature of all dwarves you get is the Dwarven Resilience. This means you take reduced damage from poison, as well as advantage against being poisoned in the first place. So what sets these guys apart from the other Dwarven subraces? Well, in Tabletop, they actually got a +2 to both Strength and Constitution, unlike other races which had a +2 and a +1 to different attributes. But this little detail was lost in the transition to video gamedom, simply because Larian changed how racial attribute bonuses worked entirely, in that they are no longer tied to what race you picked entirely. You get to pick a +2 and a +1 as you see fit to any attribute, irrespective of what race you chose. As a result, the only thing you now get as a Shield Dwarf is a proficiency in light and medium armor. The medium armor proficiency detail is what gets them on this list, however. This means you'll be able to get a massive AC boost early on in the game by wearing pieces of medium armor such as Lae'zel's Githyanki half-plate at the start of the game, regardless of what class you chose. It also means you're qualified for the heavily armored feat at level 4 regardless of what class you picked. Because of this, I highly recommend Shield Dwarves to anyone who wants access to medium or heavy armor but doesn't want to multi-class. However, given how so many classes you can pick in this game already have these armor proficiencies, it's hard to justify putting them higher on this list. Especially once you realize just how popular multi-classing is in this game. Taking the number 8 slot on this list, we have Gold Dwarves. Gold Dwarves are mostly the same as the previously mentioned Shield Dwarves, except instead of an armor proficiency, you get some extra HP as you level up. Despite the fact that I think medium armor proficiency is better, I give the Gold Dwarves a higher spot in this list for one simple reason: greater build flexibility. There are many builds in this game that will already give you medium armor proficiency naturally through the class selection you'll be taking, as well as builds that don't benefit from armor proficiencies at all, such as Draconic Sorcerers. Combine this with the fact that Gold Dwarves provide the only racial means of increasing your maximum health whatsoever, and you can see why they got a slightly higher ranking on this list. But since you're only getting 1 extra HP per level, and the in-game level cap is 12, that means you're only getting 12 extra HP by the end of the game. And I don't know about you, but 12 HP is simply not enough for you to get any higher on this list. Sneaking in at number 7, we got the Deep Gnomes. The Gnome Cunning attribute, giving you advantage on saving throws against Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma saving throws, is enough to give you an honorable mention on this list by itself. But unlike the other gnomish subraces, your subrace abilities are actually useful for something. You get superior dark vision, meaning you can see further in the dark than other races can by default. And you also have Stone Camouflage, giving you advantage on stealth checks. This means if you want to play a stealth archer like you did in Skyrim, the Smurf Neblin are one of the best races in the game to select. However, since your movement is impaired, the same as the dwarves, as well as the fact that the benefits of being a deep gnome are only sometimes relevant, I simply can't bring myself to put them any higher on this list. Coming in at number 6, just barely not making the top 5, we have the Drow. Unlike regular elves, Drow don't have proficiency in long swords, longbows, or short bows in any capacity. Instead, you get a proficiency in rapiers and hand crossbows instead. You also gain access to superior dark vision, just like the previously mentioned Deep Gnomes. If you decide to go with their half-elf variant, you lose all of this in favor of the universal weapon and armor proficiencies of all half-elves, which is a fair trade if you ask me, since shield proficiencies are just that good depending on what class you take. But regardless of what flavor of Drow you decide to play as, you do get a few universal traits. Firstly, you get the universal Fey Ancestry ability that all elves get. Advantage against getting charmed and an immunity to sleep is nice to have. Moreover, you get certain spells as you level up. When you first select this class, the spell you'll have access to is a cantrip known as Dancing Lights. I have yet to find a practical use case for this spell because why should I use this to light up the room when I already have dark vision? But once we reach level 3, we'll get access to an actually good spell known as Fairy Fire. Since this spell is acquired through racial abilities rather than through class abilities, you'll only be able to use this spell once per long rest. As for what it does, it creates an AoE that forces everyone and everything inside of it to make a dex saving throw. If they fail, they end up having a debuff that gives anyone attacking them advantage against them. This effectively means anyone who fails the dex save and has the debuff applied to them has double the chance of getting hit by enemy attacks. Then at level 5, you'll gain access to the Darkness spell. This creates an AoE of magical darkness that no one can see through. Useful if you're trying to run away from a situation, or if you just don't want anyone to see you steal their stuff. But the real reason everyone loves to play the Drow so much is due to the expanded dialogue options. This is because while certain races will have some special dialogue options in certain scenarios, Drow will have significantly more dialogue throughout the entire game. In fact, if you just want to play a character with the most unique dialogue interactions as possible, I recommend just playing a Drow Bard. As for the different variants of Drow, you have 3 different flavors. Loathsworn Drow are best for those of you who want to be an evil asshole. The Seldarine Drow are for those of you who want to say, no, you're thinking of my evil twin, not me. Meanwhile, Half Drow are best for those of you who want to be a Drow and have access to the dialogue, but also want to grow a beard. If you're curious about what makes Drow society so evil, let me explain. You know about that patriarchy thing people keep complaining about online? Yeah, ramp that up to 11 out of possible 5, and then swap the gender roles. Then add some divine intervention from a spider god to ensure it doesn't all fall apart due to its own ineptitude. And now you know everything you need to know about Drow society to get started. If unique dialogue options were all that were required to get up on this list, the Drow would be taking the first place hands down. But there's more to this game than just talking to people, and the Drow don't have anything special in that regard. If they got an actually useful cantrip that wasn't just the worthless Dancing Lights, I might give them a top 5 spot, but Unfortunately, that's not how the cookie crumbled on this one. Making it into the halfway mark at number 5, we got Half-Orcs. Intimidation proficiency is nice, but keep in mind that it doesn't stack with other effects, so if you picked a background that gives you intimidation proficiency, such as the Dark Urge, it won't stack into anything. You just effectively made one of your racial bonuses non-existent. Thankfully, your other racial bonuses are inarguably some of the most powerful in the entire game. Personally, you have Relentless Endurance. It's literally a get-out-of-death-free card once per long rest. And I'm gonna be perfectly honest, this ability is so powerful that, quite frankly, it alone is enough to justify the Half-Orcs being on this top 10 list. But what manages to get them this high up on the list, however, is the Savage Strikes ability. This ability is pretty easy to understand. Whenever you land a critical hit with a melee attack, the critical hit damage is enhanced even further. Just keep in mind that this only works with melee weapon attacks. So if you're trying to backstab people as a rogue, yes, this will enhance the critical hit damage you get with your sneak attacks, but if you try using a bow, it won't trigger whatsoever. Same logic goes with spells. Spells don't count as weapons, so even if the spell had melee range, this ability will not trigger. If the Orcs had some inbuilt way of increasing your crit rate whatsoever, they'd easily be a top 3 slot. However, they don't have any way of increasing your crit chance whatsoever. This means if you want to get the most out of the half-orc race, you're going to have to actually build around their racial abilities. This will almost certainly just be you going for a melee build and trying to crit fish. And while a melee-oriented Unga Bunga crit fishing build can be fun, this is a top 10 best race video for Baldur's Gate 3, not a top 10 best races for crit fishing builds list. Savage Attacker is only sometimes useful, and while Relentless Endurance is amazing, it's not enough to get you higher on this list. As a result of all this, I simply can't give the Half-Orcs a higher slot on this list, simply because they don't have a lot of build flexibility compared to the later entries.
Not taking the hobbits to Isengard! Not taking the hobbits to Isengard! Not taking the hobbits to Isengard! What did you say?
Just barely not making it into the top 3, we have the hobbits, Halflings. The Halflings' luck ability alone makes it so that they would inevitably end up in the top 5 on this list somewhere. And I decided to combine both sub-races onto one entry on this list, partly because I consider them apples to oranges with one another, but mostly because I wanted to spend more time talking about as many races as possible in this game. But to get started, the universal feature of all halflings is the fact that they have halfling luck. This makes it whenever you roll a nat 1 on a d20 roll in this game, you re-roll the die and keep the second result. This applies to all 20-sided die rolls you make in-game. Whether it be dialogue checks or combat attack rolls, if you rolled a 1, you get to re-roll. You do have to keep the second result though, so it is technically possible to get a nat 1 in this game as a hobbit. But consider this, you have an ability that makes it so that the 5% chance of guaranteed failure you face with any other race in the game is not really a serious concern for you anymore. Moreover, this ability technically increases your chance of landing a critical hit, since every time you would roll a 1 on your initial attack roll, you'll re-roll and possibly get a 20, meaning your chance of getting a critical hit goes up from 5% to 7.5. Any math majors who want to try to correct me on this, sound off in the comments. The secondary universal bonus that all halflings get is the Brave ability. This is just giving you advantage against being scared. So if someone casts the Fear spell on you, or a dragon comes flying overhead, you're less likely to become terrified and frozen in fear than your other party members. As for your sub-races, you can either be a Lightfoot halfling and get advantage on stealth checks, or you could pick the Strongheart halfling and get the exact same poison resistance the dwarves get under a different name tag. So with these incredibly powerful abilities under your belt, what's stopping these guys from making the top 3, nay number 1 slot? Well, you have a few downsides. Firstly, you have the same shorty movement speed penalty that both the dwarves and gnomes had to deal with earlier on in this list. That, and they're one of the only 3 playable races in the game that don't have dark vision, meaning much like humans in Dragonborn, you're gonna need to find a light source in order to see where you're going in dark places. Also keep in mind that the Halfling Luck ability doesn't have any visual indicator when it triggers. This means while Halfling Luck is inarguably the most powerful ability in the entire game, it's also one of the least satisfying racial abilities in the entire game, since you're pretty much never going to notice it. Still, if you're a major Lord of the Rings fan, I highly recommend picking one of these guys as the Dark Urge and naming your character Frodo. Coming in to take the bronze medal, we have Wood Elves. Wood Elves are near identical to the High Elves that we started this entire list with, except for one key difference. Instead of getting a choose-your-own cantrip during character select, the mobility your character gets access to each turn is increased. Remember Crusher's Ring and how basically everyone equips it to at least one party member and keeps it on them for the rest of the game? Well, if you decide to play a Wood Elf Tav or Dark Urge, you can effectively choose between having two party members have a Crusher's Ring effectively, or double Crusher's Ring's effectiveness on one character. Doing this will make all the instances where you were just a little too far away to close the gap and hit someone with a spell or ability of any kind a thing of the past for you. This singular ability is unquestionably one of the most powerful racial abilities in the entire game, only realistically surpassed in my eyes by the Halfling's Luck ability. But whilst the Halflings only have two good reasons for you to play them from a min-max perspective, one of which being their subrace feature, Wood Elves get all the universal features of being an elf. This means Fey ancestry, giving you advantage against being charmed once again, like with the Drow and High Elves, as well as choose your own proficiencies depending on whether or not you decide to be a full elf or a half-elf. You also get stealth proficiency, which is probably the least important thing to mention about Wood Elves in my opinion. All in all though, I would say Wood Elves are the best race for those of you who want to both min-max your build to the highest extent possible, but also care deeply about your physical appearance. Coming in with the silver medal, we have the Githyanki. The Githyanki are a min-maxer's wet dream. Not only do you have the same medium and light armor proficiencies that the shield dwarves at number 9 have, but you also get ancestral knowledge, which gives you proficiency in any skill of a chosen ability. This makes Githyanki a must-grab for anyone who wants to have a wide array of proficiencies on their main character. Not only that, but you also get a variety of extremely useful spells as you level up. To start things off, you get an improved version of Mage Hand. It is improved in the sense that this version of Mage Hand is invisible to enemies. At level 3, you'll gain access to the Enhanced Leap spell once per long rest, which can be useful when traversing the world. And most importantly, at level 5, you gain access to the Misty Step spell once per long rest. I'll be perfectly honest with you, you could strip away every other beneficial trait of the Githyanki and keep just this spell at level 5, and you'd be able to still make it in at number 10 with this. Not only that, but there are actually several pieces of equipment in the game that have beneficial effects when a Githyanki is wearing them. All of this combined means the Githyanki, while coming in at number 2, only failed to reach the number 1 slot by a razor's edge. So depending on how you prefer to play this game in contrast to myself, I could easily see an argument being made for why these guys deserve the number 1 slot. But before I reveal the number 1 slot, a few honorable mentions. First and foremost, we have the Rock and Forest Gnomes. Gnomish cunning alone is enough to get you an honorable mention on this list. However, when that's the only thing you have going for you, that's really not going to help you get onto the list proper. Starting with history expertise at the start of the game, the Rock Gnomes are a neat, interesting choice, but having expertise in what is arguably the most useless skill check in the entire game is still nothing to write home about. Meanwhile, the Forest Gnomes have it even worse. Having speak with animals irrespective of your class sounds good until you realize just how easy it is to get a speak with animals potion, to say nothing of the countless other methods of acquiring access to this spell. And lastly on the honorable mentions list is the Tieflings. Fire resistance is nice and you get some decent spells depending on your subrace. Don't get me wrong, Tieflings are easily my most played race in this entire game, but to be perfectly honest, I find myself almost never using the spells they get. The only times I find myself using the abilities on the Tieflings whatsoever is to use Darkness to steal stuff, the Produce Flames cantrip to get around the Shadow Curse until I reach the Last Light Inn, and Thaumaturgy if I ended up picking a class that doesn't have access to the Friends cantrip. Because generally speaking, anything that requires an activated action on my part to use is something that's probably going to get overshadowed by all the other cool stuff I'll find as I play through the game. Passive abilities that don't require me to remember they physically exist in order to use them are going to be valued much more highly than ones that do. And I suspect that's going to be the source of the majority of disagreements about this list, because there is a loud vocal minority here that goes on about how you need to min-max some weird multi-class in order to play this game right, when realistically you can just ignore this list entirely, pick the objectively worst race in the game, decide what class you're gonna play at a complete dice roll, and you'll still have an amazing time. This is because the game is well balanced and fun. As long as you pick a difficulty setting that's appropriate to your skill level as a player, there's really nothing wrong you can do here. And even if you do somehow accidentally come across the wrong answer, all the important things you could have gotten wrong can be respec'd at withers on a dime. This list exists solely to help people who are struggling to decide between one race or another finally come to a decision and actually start playing the damn game. And the only reason I didn't tell you this at the start of the video is so that I can increase my watch time for the algorithm. But with that said, let's now move on to the number 1 on this list. Drumroll please. And coming in on top is the Dwagar. The Dwagar are a subrace of dwarves. This means they have the same universal pros all dwarves have. Proficiency in hammers and axes, advantage against being poisoned, and you only take half damage when you take poison damage. All of this at the low cost of not having as much movement per turn as some of the other races. But what sets these guys apart from the other dwarves who barely made it onto the top 10 list at all? Well, for starters, you have superior dark vision, which means you can see opponents from further away in dark places, useful if you want to be something of a ranged attacker whatsoever. You also got a unique feature called Dwagar Resilience. This gives you advantage against illusions, being charmed, as well as being paralyzed. In other words, you have advantage against the most annoying status conditions in the entire game. And as you level up, you get some additional abilities. Starting at level 3, you'll gain access to the Enlarge spell. This spell is pretty self-explanatory. Once per long rest, you can make yourself bigger and hit harder. And while this can be quite nice to have on hand, the real reason you're this high on the list is what you get at 5th level. A once per battle invisibility spell. You heard that right. You can cast this spell once per battle, and if you're not in combat, that effectively means as much as you goddamn want. So you have advantage against some of the most annoying status conditions in the entire game, as well as an invisibility spell that you can use ad nauseum effectively. These two facets alone were going to get the Dwagar into the top 3 hands down. But when you start adding in all the universal pros of the dwarves, yeah, number 1's hard not to justify. In fact, I would say anyone who's trying to min-max the perfect character in terms of stats should at least try these guys out at least once. But that's all for now. Like the video if you did, comment what yins think I got wrong, and if someone manages to change my mind about anything, I'll pin them down below. I've been an Ian, you have been you. Thank you for watching.